We take time in the month of November. We have done this, I should have looked how many years in a row. I don't recall, 5, 6, 8, 10, I'm not sure. We take time in the month of November as an exercise in helping us cultivate gratitude. We hear testimonies of God's goodness and his faithfulness from the people of our church. Over the years, some of the stories are really lighthearted, jaw-dropping in the sense of God just delivered something incredible as an easy-to-receive blessing. And some of the stories are in really difficult and challenging seasons that are sometimes heavy and hard to hear. This morning, I'm going to invite Titus and Cindi Shears to join me. As they come, I hope you know what to listen for and why. We're going to hear 3 stories from their life. One of how they came to be married, though each of them were not exactly walking with faithfulness, the path of obedience. The Lord in his kindness brought them together. Then we're going to see from a time in their life during medical school. Titus is a doctor. We're going to see how the Lord provided for them in some incredible ways when they lacked. And then the last story that we'll consider is a more difficult one, but you'll hear from them that God was very faithful to show his goodness even as they walked through, about a year ago, the death of one of their grandchildren. So the reason we do this is we all know that we're supposed to be grateful. So we all teach our kids to say thank you. And yet we all also know that simply because you utter the words thank you, that can be about 10 miles away from gratitude. And gratitude is the goal. You become grateful as you reflect upon specific ways in which God has been faithful and God has been good. So as they're sharing this morning, I hope that it will set us off on a trajectory over the next several weeks that you would spend time thinking, praying, talking with your family and your friends about God's goodness and faithfulness to you, that your heart might actually become grateful. Because you'll probably remember at your Thanksgiving meal, somebody is going to remember that we're supposed to say thank you. So probably all of you will check the box and say thank you. But may we actually grow in our gratitude to the Lord. So that's why we're doing this morning. As we begin, why don't you tell us just a little bit about each of yourselves?
Hi, Cindi.
Hi.
Do you want to tell yourself?
Sure. I was born in Seattle, Washington, to believing parents. They were both missionary kids, and what we lovingly call MKs. And their parents were missionaries in Alaska, both of them. We lived in Seattle. I had an older brother and a younger brother. My younger brother died at the age of 3.5, and he had spina bifida. I was 6 at the time. After he died, about a year after he died, we moved to the island of Aruba. Sounds great, but my dad was a technical engineer for a radio station there, and that's what we were involved in for years. I was in homeschool for 2 years, and then went to a boarding school in Venezuela, which was a 2-day trek from Aruba to the school. And that's where I met Titus in 5th grade. I didn't like him.
Well deserved.
Was Titus, why did you not like him, just as a quick aside?
I was a brat.
Okay.
That's another story. So,
Ongoing story.
we started dating in 11th grade. It took a while for me to change my mind. And ended up breaking up in between 11th and 12th, got back together, broke up again in the first year of college, but then got married in about 85, and then I got pregnant and started having kids and became a housewife and stayed with it until now.
So this
Well,
is the
I'm not a
picture
housewife.
of Titus and Cindy's 3 adult kids and their grandkids. Just by way of affirmation, it is less and less common that young women see as their primary vocation managing a home and raising children. And yet there are fewer vocations in the world as honorable and dignified and necessary for human flourishing. So thank you for giving your life to that.
Thank you.
All right, so just tell us quickly of your children, and then everybody else can imagine where the rest of the kids fit in.
Okay, starting from the right, in the back row, there's Chris, our youngest. And
For others, that might be your left, but that's okay.
Is that your
Go for
left?
it, go for it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm really bad
Chris
with
in the
this.
Christmas sweater.
Christmas, yeah, he's in the Christmas sweater. He's the youngest, and his 3 girls and wife, and then the middle son is Josh and Kate. Now, Chris and my mom and dad go to Medina Chapel. So, and then Josh and Kate and Fella, and Josh and Kate do not believe, so they don't go anywhere. And then Ben and Rachel and their 4 kids are over there who do go.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cindy. Mr. Shears, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my parents were believers as well, too. I was born into a believing family. My dad was in seminary, and I was led to the Lord by my mother at age 4. We went overseas to missionaries to Colombia. Went to Costa Rica for language school when I was in 2nd grade, Colombia and Venezuela, then where I also went to boarding school, so a school where you stay and live at. And I met Cindi in 5th grade, and we were in class together for 6th grade. Over the next 6 years, we had a lot of visa and travel problems, and so we only made it over to the boarding school for 3 out of the next 6 years. Cindi mentioned breaking up with me. Partially that was, not partially, it was because I was suspended for a month for alcohol-related items in 11th grade. And then we graduated, came back to the States, and I was in Bible college. And I was expelled from Bible college for alcohol-related issues. And so that cost. My parents considered leaving the mission field. I went through, I lost Cindi for 2 years, and had to really come to deal with the issues of integrity, what it meant to be subject to authority, what it meant to live up to your word. Finished college, and Cindi and I got married. I got into medical school at the University of Washington, and then came out here for residency. We moved to Wadsworth for my first job after residency, and started coming to Valley View here about a year and a half after it was started. So we've been coming here for 28 and a half years.
What do you currently do vocationally, Titus?
So I'm a physician executive. I'm in charge of medical education at Cleveland Clinic Akron General. Did cystic fibrosis care. Was at Children's for about 30 years.
Nice. For those of you who haven't met Titus in the past, Titus serves as the chairman of our oversight elder board. And they've been a part of the church for a long time, got introduced to the chapel in Akron a long time ago. So part of an additional benefit to this time is you'll get a glimpse into Titus's life and some of his experience that inform how he knows the Lord and how he helps offer spiritual oversight to our church. All right, so let's pick up the first story of how you guys came to be married. So you met each other in 5th grade. That's fun. 11th grade, start dating, not work out because Titus isn't exactly...
Senior year.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that picture.
Were your glasses tinted that much all the time, or is that just like a light issue?
That was a...
Transition lenses in the old day. Yeah,
Yeah, that's just a light.
Okay, so you broke up, got back together, and part of that was, well, almost entirely because of your conduct, and your parents said, this is not a young man that you have our blessing to be around. Okay, so then you found yourselves no longer at the same boarding school together. Cindi, you were back in Seattle. Why don't you pick up the story there? You found a great job, your first job in Seattle.
Yeah. I found my first job in Seattle. It was a great job. It was the first time I had really ever felt any sense of self-worth was at that job. praised me. I was one of the top 2 people in the job that I was working at, and I met a guy there. And at the time, because of my self-worth, I wasn't really paying attention to God. I was really, really seeking to find worth for myself and wherever I could find it. And there wasn't a place for me at church. And I didn't go seeking it there, which I should have. And I knew better, and I should have. And so I went seeking it other places. And I ended up finding a guy that I shouldn't have, and started dating him there.
And he really wanted to marry you.
Yes, he did. He really wanted to marry me.
So that relationship came to a pretty forceful head.
Yes, it did. It did. He asked me to marry him, and I said no, because God screamed at me. He had been playing, this sounds really weird, but he'd been playing the song Sting that Sting had done. Every breath you take, every move you make, I'll be watching you. And that song was playing over and over and over again. And God kept saying, I'm watching every move you make. And I went, oh dear. And then he asked me to marry him. And God said, no, you'll be unequally yoked. You can't do that, no. And I went, okay. So I said no to him. I finally got enough oomph that I said no to him. And he didn't give up. He hounded me, just hounded me. And I didn't know what to do. So I ran to my brother and my uncle, and in 48 hours, they had me packed up. And I was on a plane back to Aruba, back home, 5,000 miles away, to get away from him and to get away from my problems. I was running away because I thought I might be pregnant. Not a good way to go. I got there, dealt with my parents with the issue, and I asked them with fear in my heart that they would say no to call Titus because they didn't like him. And amazingly enough, they said, yeah, we think that's a good idea.
So I got a phone call, having been broken up now for over a year, and with a little contact. And so Cindi she was really hurting, and so reached back out. This is a long time ago, so phone calls from overseas were many bucks a minute, and so there wasn't a lot of phone calls. But we started writing. I struggled with Cindi was really upfront about details, and so I struggled. Got counseling from a pastor who had been really helpful for me. And we began to have a correspondence, a regular correspondence, as Cindi was in Aruba and I was in Huntington, West Virginia, working full-time and going to college.
As time went on, it was getting time for my parents to leave the field, and we were getting ready to go. We ended up moving back because my grandmother was dying, and so we moved back in the spring of 1984. We continued with letters and calls. We still didn't see each other. You did come out in the summer of 84, and then we saw each other then again in the Christmas of 84.
That's when I proposed.
When you proposed.
So 3.5 years, we've seen each other twice.
Physically, seen each other.
Physically, and this has been mostly by letters and phone calls. But it was just very clear that God, that we were committed to each other, sort of the well-being of each other, and God allowed us to come together that way. And then we got married in the summer of 85.
Yeah. It just amazed me that God was faithful to my heart, because my heart always loved him, always loved him, and always felt committed to him, and always felt that we should get together. And even though I went so far off the path, God still brought me back around. And
I think through each of these, one of the themes that we've seen through it was that there were times through this, whether when me getting in trouble several times, when we clearly wasn't following. And there were times for Cindi when she wasn't following God. And yet he was faithful. He kept calling. He kept putting things in front of us. And Psalms 103 talks about God being gracious and merciful, and that he knows our frame, and we knows we're dust. And like a compassionate father, he doesn't hold us accountable for all of our sins. He covers them. And we saw that lived out through our lives, that he was faithful through times of real challenge and our disobedience, both to bring us to him, but back together again.
Mm-hmm. And all that was almost 40 years ago.
We've been married 39 years now.
Mm-hmm.
When will you celebrate your 40th anniversary?
August this next year.
All right. Amen. All right, so this next story, you've been married for a couple of years, and you find yourself working your way through medical school, which you're aware, long, arduous process. Both of you having been raised by missionaries who generally don't carry in tow large suitcases of cash. You found yourself in a financially really difficult place, lots of uncertainty. We pick up the story, Titus, where you had an important exam in the credentialing process that did not go according to plan.
So medical school, the first 2 years are all book stuff, and then the last 2 years all practical stuff, long hours. And so in between, there's the first part of a 3-part licensure exam. And so I took it, and I failed, and the world crumbled. We had been living in a mobile home that we owed, and we had sold it. And so we had no housing. And in fact, many of our rotations were lined up that had housing as part of them. And all that got canceled having failed that exam. The federal government changed their rules about whether they were predicting whether that we needed physicians. And so they canceled a bunch of subscription or money for medical students because they were predicting they had too many physicians. We were already about $60,000 in debt. And so we approached my parents about would they co-sign a loan. And my dad, they were home on furlough, sat down and explained from biblically why that wouldn't be a good faith item to do. And so they declined. And it was a good decision. It was wise. And we recognized it at the time that Dad was right to not pursue an answer that wasn't a biblical answer. And yet by the same token, it certainly felt like the world was falling apart. We ended up back at Cindy's parents' house. We have a 2-year-old. Cindy's pregnant with our second. We're up to our eyeballs in debt. I'm at a crux in medical school, and it's really looking like it's going to fall about. And then yet, God provides. And so from that moment where we were feeling really low.
Amazingly, not amazingly, I guess, Titus passed the retake of his exam in California. And my friends, or my mom and dad, were able to find some friends in California, or that had lived in California, now lived in Seattle, that we were able to live in their guest house for $25 a month. And we all were able to qualify for food stamps and WIC and welfare.
In fact, the state of Washington considered my medical school jobs training.
And then we were able to start the 3rd year of medical school.
So from the summer to the time school starts back, now a little bit delayed, God has turned things dramatically around. And so as we start school, Cindi goes to the grocery store and uses her first example of food stamps, which were physical food stamps at the time, and her first WIC coupons. My wife comes home sobbing.
That was a humbling experience. Going to the grocery store and standing in line, putting your groceries up on the conveyor belt, and having the people behind you say, I paid for that. My money paid for that. I can't afford that Welch's grape juice or that Tillamook. How come you can have it? I was devastated.
And it was a recurring theme. That wasn't a one-time event, that was a regular event. Cindy began to shop at 2 in the morning to avoid people's comments in line as we used those benefits. Our second son, Josh, was born. We were at a community hospital, and within 12 hours, he had to be transferred to the University of Washington. In a snowstorm, I drove behind that ambulance as it watched it pull over to the side of the road, and through the glass in the back, I could watch them code my newborn son. He made it, they pulled him off, and went on the way, and we got to the University of Washington. He was there for 6 days in the ICU. About the third day, I got a phone call telling me that because I'd been absent for 3 days, medical school is not very tolerant of missing class, that I was in danger of being suspended, and probably at the very least they'd need to repeat the year. And so God was great, and we simply said, well, we appreciate that. We'll finish school in God's time, but I'm not leaving the hospital until my son's out of danger. They were like, oh, we're so sorry. No, we didn't know. I mean, what resources can we get to bring to you? But God was faithful. And so he continued to provide. I did well in school. We were given a 6-month rotation in Spokane, Washington. We were in Seattle that had free housing. And so we headed across to go there. And I remember when they showed us the place, and the first thing that Cindy saw.
Oh, I got so excited. It had an indoor pool. We were going in the middle of winter, and it had an indoor pool that was free. I could go to it anytime I wanted to with the kids. It was wonderful.
One of our fellow friends who had been with the mission knew about churches in the area and put us in contact with a church. We found a church family that we were there for 6 months. In the final month of that third year, it's referred to as clerkships, it's kind of a tough year. As we were nearing the end of it, though, we still, no money coming in. We actually had a month where we had no rotations. We had no housing long term. The people there said, no, you can stay in the student housing for a month. It's okay. Free, just there's no other rotations. Nobody needs it. You can stay there. But at the time, this is in the late 80s, early 90s. You don't get your money by electronically. And so there was a check that came in, and we had to drive back 300 miles to Seattle to pick up that check. And we were counting money. Did we have enough gas to get there? And so when we got there, the check turned out to be bigger than what we anticipated. And they told us, oh, we have student housing for you now on campus for your 4th year. And as soon as you're done in Spokane, you can pick up that housing. And we had this magical day where we went, I remember we went to it was a Holiday Inn, and we got to eat at a Sizzler restaurant, restaurant actually, steak, and we got to spend time with the kids in the pool. And God was just like, I love you. Arms around us, that he loved us. And that day, it's 40-some years ago, and it's like ingrained in our mind about how good that was. We matched into our first choice, ended up in Akron. And again, the same missionary told us about the church in Spokane, told us about this great church in Akron, the chapel. And so we were embedded in the chapel for the 4 years we were in residency. And then my first job was here in Wadsworth. And we ran into Bill McClure at the grocery store. And Bill McClure had been our ABF leader. He was the first pastor of this church. So we started attending here about 1.5 years into the existence here. And so I think it's just all along we saw that these were tough times. They're not unique to us. Couples have tough times financially, but God was faithful, always faithful. It was hard to wait for him sometimes.
Yeah. How did the experience of welfare, food stamps, the humiliation you experienced, that Cindi experienced, how has that affected you as a doctor?
I'm in charge of educational aspects for a healthcare system. So I have about 400 employees, and I have about 180 residents under me. I'm probably the only one among that group who's ever been on welfare. I'm probably the only one on that group. And yet the patients I serve often are people who don't. So there's just something. Also, it's the whole list of experiences. I'm the chief disciplinarian for our institution. And yet I've been forgiven much. We got asked to do write your life in 3 sentences sort of experience once. Everybody's writing their stuff. And mine was, I have failed often and spectacularly. I've been forgiven repeatedly. I'm secure in the love of my God and my family, and as a result, I have no fear. Not a bad description of what God prepares you for. So it comes into work every day that the things that we've experienced are common to men, and people need love, and they need an opportunity to recognize that redemption's there.
Yeah, amen. So the last story that we're going to look at is the loss of Will. We'll spare you all of the medical details, but at about 5.5 years old, in a handful of days, Will went from observably healthy and happy to came to the end of his life. So why don't we pick up the story where you had plans to watch Will, and you got a call from Kate, his mother, that said he was up all last night throwing up. We're going to have to change the plans. Why don't we pick up the story there?
Sure. So they have the tradition of celebrating a birthday by the parents spending the day with, and it was Fella's birthday. So we were going to watch Will, and so the call, as you said. So over the course of about 60 hours, Will went from being up all night throwing to the emergency department, ambulance to Akron Children's and septic shock, to the pediatric intensive care unit, to the OR that night, on ECMO the next day, brain function going down, and then passing away on Monday as he ceased to have function. And so it didn't matter what happened, he just got worse, and nothing was going to turn it around. Mm-hmm. And so it was pretty horrible. During the time that he was dying, God was good, and we saw evidence of it. Our family came to our house, all the kids. There were 18 people in the house as we went through this together, but we went through this as a family. God provided, Cindi, do you want to mention about the children's? I mean...
Oh, yeah. Because Titus had worked at Children's for 30 years, the rest of us didn't have a worry about whether he was being taken care of well or that they were doing things right, because we knew the people that were there. And if they came up with something that we just didn't understand, we turned to him and said, help, translate this for us. And he was able to tell us what they were talking about.
I think Bob Sega's daughter came over and watched the kids for a day, and we were able to all be at the hospital because of that. It was just amazing. We were, Kate's brother, Tyler, and his wife Amanda and their daughter Madison came over from Pennsylvania. They were helping them, and it turned out they were believers. And so we had them in the household. And Madison was also helping with the kids, and they were doing crafts and little Bible verses, and we came home to that. It was just a continued reminder that God was there, even in the midst of what was horrible. And as he passed away, we had a chance to pray as a family and thank him, God, for what he was doing, knowing full well it wasn't what we had wanted it to be. But as he passed, and the next days are a whirlwind, but even there, we've continued to see God. Cindi was at the table with the kids planning the funeral.
Yeah, while we were planning the funeral, we got kind of waylaid in our heads and weren't paying attention to time and realized that we had missed lunch. And we realized we were kind of hungry. And so we said, oh no, what are we going to do for lunch? And there was a knock at the door. So one of my sons went and answered it and came back with a bag from Honey Baked Hams, and put it down on the table, and it was sandwiches for lunch. It was a total lunch package. And it was like, I mean, not everybody at the table were Christians. So the rest of us went, wow, look how fast God answered that one. So it was like, this is so cool.
We need lunch, doorbell, food.
Yep.
Yeah. Planning a funeral for a 5.5-year-old at a funeral home is tough. And the tenderness of the funeral home people was great. I can't say enough for Philip Decker, the pastor here, how helpful he was, what a kind and compassionate heart he had as he helped us through that. It was amazing the benefit that was. Our son and his daughter didn't want there to be a Christian service. This is the one who don't follow. And so the church put a meal together. And so they got to see the love of the church without a reciprocation. No, you have to have a service. There has to be a chance to share the word. No, the answer was, we just know you're hurting and we love you. And the women of the church put on an amazing feast for them and a chance for them to grieve with family here in the building with no demands for anything on them. But for those of us who are believers, it was really tough not to have a funeral, not to have a memorial service. And so I came to Zach, and about 3 weeks afterwards, they had, in the evening, a memorial service for us as a family here. I can't tell you, Philip and Zach, it was amazing for us to just come before the Lord and lament, for us to hurt, for us to at the same time recognize that God's good and he's faithful, and that right now it hurts. But on the other hand, we get to see that. It's hard to describe coming into the hallway and watching a room that was transformed from what we thought, and just a chance to be safe in the arms of our fellows and in God. It was amazing. Community's response was really good, and really supported our family during that. But God continued to give peace. A couple of weeks later, as we struggled.
I struggled when Will died, feeling that as I held his hand, I told God that I don't think I could handle it if God didn't have him have a hold of Will. And I struggled for weeks with that, asking God to please let me know you've got him. And finally, a couple weeks later, God gave me a memory of a time that I had with Will. And it was, he and I were alone. I was babysitting him. And Will was playing on a game, and he turned around, and he looked at me, and he goes, Cece, as they call me, do you know that God loves you? And I went, yeah, do you? And he goes, yeah, I do. And turned back around, and I was like, oh, okay, wow, God, that's really cool. So then a couple minutes later, he turns back around and goes, Cece. And I go, yeah. And he goes, do you know that Jesus died for you? And I went, yeah, do you? And he goes, yep, I do. And he turns back around. I had no idea that God was putting that out there for me for later. I was flabbergasted at that moment, so much so I couldn't say anything. Then, when I remembered it, I was like, oh no, this is just my grieving memory making up things. And so this might not be real. But I remembered that I had told my mother about it right away afterwards. So I said, okay, Lord, if this is real, then can you have my mother tell me this on her own, this thing that he told me? And so the very next day, my mother, on her own, told me. She said, do you remember what Will said? And went, and told me everything. And I was like, oh, Lord.
I didn't make it up.
I didn't make it up. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know that you've got him, that you're faithful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Amen.
Fast forward a few months, and some of you may remember that the church puts on a fall festival, and so last year it was sort of rainy, snowy, and it was cold, and so stuff got put in here, and we brought Fella, and I was doing the running around chasing part, and Cindi was sitting down, and I remember Fella had run down the hallway to the bathroom, and as we came back, she went to go do stuff, and it was in the lobby, and Cindi was sitting over and motioning for me to come over, and she was sitting with Miss Brianna, and so I came over, and you told me a story.
Yeah, Brianna had told me that her class, her second and third grade class, had been praying for Fella, had been praying that she would come to the class, to come to Sunday school, and that she would be saved. And then when Fella would come, this was after Will died, that when she came, the kids would go nuts and then love on her. And she was so excited to see their response. Once again, I was flabbergasted because I'd been praying that somebody would come into Fella's life other than us that would bring Fella closer to God. I never in my life imagined it would be second and third graders or that big of a crowd. I prayed for one person, and God showed himself big and faithful again.
Yeah, I think the other piece that got me about that story was not only were people praying for and witnessing, but God was using Will's death for a class of second and third graders under the guidance of Miss Brianna and the teachers who teach your children to have an exposure in praying for someone and witnessing. And that just meant the world to us. Could you pull up the picture that has our family, the second to the last picture, I think, that had the family? This is the last picture, Will, but I think it sort of raises, if you look on the wall behind at the bottom above my head, there's a plaque on that wall, and it has Daniel 3:18. But if not, God is still good. The prayers that we were praying the most at that point was that God would heal him. And that's not the way God chose to do it. But he's still good. And so I don't know that we'll ever be over the grief of Will's passing. We'll work our way through it over time. But I know that death that came for Will, it entered this world by sin. And that sin's not going to be fully redeemed until the day of the Lord. But even in the midst of it, we could tell you dozens more ways God's been faithful, remains faithful through this. I mentioned to Zach that in a health crisis for me, about 6 or 7 years ago, he shared Psalm 27, where at the end of it, he says, you know, I look forward that I'll read it, because I believe that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord, of Yahweh, in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage and wait for the Lord. God hasn't made us wait for the things that he's still doing, but we know that there's more, and it'll take us a long time to get over.
As I'd ask you one more question. As you have spent a lot of time reflecting on God's goodness and faithfulness, maybe several weeks ago, I asked Titus if he would and Cindi would be willing to share, so the three of us sat down for a much longer conversation than this, and it was like story after story of God's faithfulness. I'm like, well, we gotta pick a few here. So you've spent a lot of time together looking at old pictures over the past several weeks, just reflecting on God's goodness and faithfulness to you. What has been some of the effect that exercise has had on you?
I think one of the things that we try to do as a family is, you use the word reflect. We try hard to be thoughtful about remembering and telling the stories. It's so easy to get caught up in day to day. It's so easy to not start. We have the practice in our prayer of starting off by saying thanks, by recognizing the qualities. You do that when you lead us as elders, the idea of recognizing God's qualities and what we're thankful for. It frames things differently. At work, I have a 3x5 card that I keep in my pocket that I write down the list of things that I do in the day. But at the top, it reminds me to try to put down 3 things I'm thankful for. And then further down the card, it has a place that tries to remind me to who do I want to consciously try to bless today with something, forcing me to get out of my frame of reference to try to be thinking about that. I think the ones that through this conversation, I think for us are the last 3 or 4 weeks, which has had some really tough moments, and looking at pictures was both good and tough. But by the same token, I think the big theme has been how thankful I am that God doesn't hold me accountable at the level he could. I'm so thankful for the way that he brings to our mind at least some of the stories that we get to see finished, at least some of the things that we get to see his goodness. And that provides a lot of a comfort in the times when it's dark and we don't know what he's trying to do right now.
Yeah, amen. Well, would you join me in saying thank you to Titus and Cindi for sharing this morning?